cannot stand the feel of raw meat on my hands. Plus, then I don't have to wash them all the time. I use 80/20 ground beef for this. You could probably do it with a higher or lower fat concentration, but higher may be too greasy and hard to work with, and lower, it may end up being a little drier or more tough. I haven't tried it because I just prefer the 80/20. I thawed my meat overnight in the fridge, but there are some spots that are still a little frozen, so I like to make sure I go through and try to break them up. The story of how this meatloaf came to be is actually kind of funny, also a little embarrassing, I guess. I cook and bake quite a bit, but certain recipe formats really are just, I guess, not meant for me, and I don't always read the instructions thoroughly. So I had actually made this recipe for meatloaf quite a few times before I realized that I had accidentally put the traditional like glaze topping ingredients in with the meat. I don't love glaze, so I hadn't really paid attention to the fact that that's what this recipe called for. So I actually put the ketchup and everything into the meat. But that's also kind of like the hidden secret of why it's so moist and delicious. And even the milk, because I don't like it to be super soupy, and I also don't want it to be super sweet. And instead of regular onions, because my husband doesn't like them, I just use the dried ones because they rehydrate in this anyway. You'll see that I put all those ingredients in all together, which, I mean, that is how the recipe was laid out, so I know why I mixed it up. And that is one of my pet peeves with recipes, when they just throw all the recipe ingredients together. Once I've dumped all the ingredients in, I mix it by hand, trying not to overmix because you can do that with ground meat if you're not careful. And I do have a meat masher I use for a couple of the hard clumps because it hadn't totally thawed. But for the most part, I just use my hands to try and make sure all the crumbs and everything get distributed fairly evenly. Into my pans, you'll see the USA pans, which I love. I try to pack it in there pretty good, but don't overfill it. You want some space at the top in order to leave room for the grease and stuff. You don't want it packed so high that the grease then drips out into your oven. Sure that the meat has reached a safe internal temperature. I also use a little grease strainer and pour the grease off into the foil. It doesn't show in the video, but I do usually rebake them a little bit afterwards just to crisp. in the video, that it stays really juicy and moist, but not greasy, which is really important. So if you think you don't like meatloaf, give this one a try. You might be surprised. I have converted many a meatloaf hater, and I actually never even grew up eating it because my dad detested it. So try this recipe out. This is not cafeteria meatloaf. Thanks for joining me for this, and hopefully it will convince you to give meatloaf one more chance. Make sure to subscribe and check out my other videos. I try to cover a range of topics so that you can find more joy in your day-to-day life, be less overwhelmed.
All the things to make real life more manageable and more joyful.